So we're here today with Lauren Okie, author of The Best Worst Thing. I was excited when you had chimed in because we recently interviewed Lindsay Maple, author of
Mhm.
Holly Jolly July, and she had sent some posts about it. You had chimed in the comments section. I'm like, Lauren Okie. I'm like, I just read your book. So, of course, I had to get you onto the pre-order podcast to talk about your book that I really enjoyed. As I was heading out, in addition to owning the bookstore, I also work full time for our county chamber of commerce, and told my coworker I'm heading out to do an interview for the author of The Best Worst Thing, and she said, "What is the best worst thing?" I had my answer, which I think traumatized her. What is your answer to what is the best worst thing?
I have like the long and the short. I'll give you the short. The way I try to pitch the book when I'm talking to another human who's sort of outside of the noise in my brain is it's a modern love story about a woman in her 30s whose life goes up in flames and who gets this sort of silver lining opportunity to reconnect with a misconnection from work. And she gets a chance to do that while having to deal with the wreckage of her past and the decision she's made in her 20s. And so I guess I'll back up and give that more context, which is like it's about a woman in an unhappy marriage who thinks that, a perfect baby is going to put her back together again. And she finds out her husband is having an affair and gets this really special opportunity to try out a relationship with somebody that she maybe had feelings with in the past, but she only gets to do that in this short period of time where she has to deal with the fact that her life is going to change. That makes any sense.
Yes.
So it's a little bit of like The Office, a Jim and Pam vibe. It's also very much a book about domestic disillusionment, and it's also just a love story about finding yourself and finding your person.
And where was this story born out of? What was the inspiration for the best worst thing?
So I have a really similar, my protagonist, Nicole, I have a really similar infertility story to hers. I started trying to have a baby when I was 27. I didn't have my daughter till I was 31. And that process, it was sort of, I wrote this in my acknowledgments. My infertility history was so intense and convoluted and complex that I couldn't put all of that information into the book because it would have been unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everything that could have been wrong with my doctors, with my body, went wrong. But it happened to me, and I knew what it felt like to sort of break like a little, like month after month for a long period of time. And so I think I did 4 rounds of IVF. I did 4 embryo transfers to myself. I had 3 surgeries to try to like prepare my uterus to have a child, all of which didn't work. And then eventually, I think I was 30 when my doctors were like, at that point, I had 2 or 4 miscarriages. We're like, you're not going to carry a child. At which point, and this is just compressing all of like the slow drip of misery like
Yeah.
during all this time. And so we turned to surrogacy, which is obviously an enormous privilege. But that was our next step. We had these embryos. And then we thought that was going to fix it because I was the problem, right? But it didn't. It didn't work until the third try. And I just, at the time, I was a full-time copywriter at that time, and I remember I started a memoir on this, and I got about 50 pages in. It was very self-indulgent. It was probably writing that I needed to do for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was like, someone's going to buy this, which is not true because this story was missing something. And I figured that out around page 50. And the problem was that I only had one obstacle in my life, and it was that I couldn't get pregnant. And maybe that would make a nice essay, but it wasn't a 400-page book. And I had this kind of idea banging around my head that if there was some secondary explosion in the background that kind of pulled the earth out from under my feet, that I would have a really cool book. And I kind of immediately, like, it was a joke, and I was like, this could be a story if my husband like had an affair, right? Like, there
Mhm.
needed to be some sort of dual betrayal, where I brought like the main character energy of sort of being at war with your body, um, which is interesting, right? But it's like, but at the end of the day, like, if you have a supportive partner, if you don't run out of resources, like and you eventually get what you want, it's kind of a boring story. It's just a chapter. And
Mhm.
so this was in like 2017. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. I don't know, and then I had wanted to write a book my whole life, but I just couldn't. I couldn't think of anything worth saying. Like, these ideas that I had would kind of burn out after 30 or 40 pages. I went on to have my daughter in a Hail Mary situation very similar to the one Nicole gets herself in like the first 30, 40 pages of the book. Not a spoiler, it's on the back,
Yeah.
that a baby does come. But I started during COVID. I had my best friend and I had a little girl my age. All of us and our husbands, we all got COVID at the same time, like a year into the pandemic. And my best friend, Eileen, I'm sure she'll watch this. She's like my biggest hype
Mhm.
girl, is a voracious reader of romance. And we were just walking, and it was very like Mary Shelley, like Frankenstein-esque, when they're all in that house for the summer telling ghost stories. And I just started telling her a story because she had like run out of books to read or something. It was not this story. It was some other story. And I was like, oh my God, I should write it. And I went home and I wrote it, and it took a few months, and I got to 60,000 words, and it was real bad. It was really, really, really bad. I didn't know and at some point I was like, I need to stop this and put this effort into that idea that I had in 2017. Like, that was a solid idea. That made sense. And so I took the momentum I got from this sort of yap with my friend and put it into this book. And it just felt like magic from the first page. I had such a like understanding of Nicole's wound right away. The infidelity part of the story is not something that I have massive experience with, like outside of like high school, like I
Mhm.
which, but it is such like, so that was like the part that I really needed to do the research on and do the work on, and that got easier for me, like the farther after the first draft, because I knew Nicole so well that I no longer had to guess, oh, how would someone feel if their husband did that to them, because it didn't matter, because I knew Nicole, and so I knew how Nicole would feel. And so our stories are really intertwined, and some other things that I wanted to explore when I was writing that are not just, oh, she has this body that won't do the one thing that she really wants it to, but how oftentimes women wear or are burdened by that, by infertility, in a way that maybe their partners aren't. And I don't think that's always the case, but I think it certainly can be, especially as Nicole is, she's not the higher earner in her relationship, and it seems like this kind of like quiet and unwritten thing that she needs to be able to bring to the table. And since it's her body that has the shortcoming, it's just this kind of like quiet drip of inadequacy, and it pulls her away from her career, and it pulls her, and by pulling her away from her career, it pulls her away from her friends. And she's in this town that belongs to her husband, and then she starts this podcast, and like the world gets so small that it becomes so easy to make your whole life about this perfect baby. And it's so easy to ignore all the other red flags, that are just like so big and right in front of you, because baby, baby, baby. And this is something that I feel like comes up for so many women who are struggling, to have a child, is, you can't do these treatments, or you can't try to adopt a baby. You can't do this without really, really, really wanting it, because it's so hard that you'll just give up. But it doesn't mean that, like, and so it becomes bigger than maybe it was. I was like, yeah, I'll have a kid. That's how I felt about it at 27. And then I'm like, why am I spending 14 hours a day on Reddit reading about eating pineapple core to increase my chances of like my outcome by like 0.067%? And it's like cognitive dissonance, or I don't know, there must be some psychological reason, like, that makes us think that we want something more or that we have to have it once it becomes important to us. And I really wanted to explore that with Nicole. And so even though our lives end up being really different, I just saw so much of like that, like 30 something, like need to have a goal in the both of us. And it was really fun to explore that. And especially like, I want to say this because now I've been talking about these big things, like to explore all of that in the template of like a really fun love story, like to
Mm.
be able to do both. And so it's like to tell the story I wanted to tell in that sort of memoir while having her like fall in love with somebody new who can help heal her through these like really playful scenes, you know, and get her back in touch. And that's Logan, and he's wonderful. But like kind of get her back in touch with like the person she was before she made this her whole world.
I was following everything that you were going through, and then I'm like, what question do I want to go with next? Writing from a place of trauma, the trauma that you had experienced, was the writing helpful, or was it a distraction? Was the trauma a distraction at any point while you were going through and telling this story?
For me, no. I think I had the benefit of distance. So the I found out that my surrogate was pregnant in 2018, November 2018. And I started writing this book in spring of 22. And what's funny is at that point, I had sort of endured two additional traumas that had given me the distance that I probably needed to not allow the infertility trauma to swallow the entire story. It's the B story. You know, the A story here is a love story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, you know, the pandemic, which was like a shared trauma for all of us that changed the way that, you know, life works. At least, you know, if you didn't suffer a loss or something during that time. And then the second is that my mom was diagnosed with cancer and died like several months later. And that was during the pandemic. And so, and that is not, there's a little bit of that story, teeny tiny, in Nicole's relationship with her surrogate, which is just like a little wink to my mother.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not, that was sort of the trauma that was hanging over my head when I wrote this story. And I think that it actually allowed me it did two things, which is that one, it allowed me to keep, like I said, the infertility trauma right size, like for a love story. This is a book about Nicole and Logan, and infertility is where Nicole was before the story picks up. And so she's picking up the pieces of that, you know, but this is about what's next for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that new trauma that I was healing from, because that was where I was. And so this story was almost like a relief. And I also have to say, like, and this is, you know, I got my baby. And I think that's not like, that is the sort of thing where when I was struggling with this, I would have like just wanted to kill like whoever got to say that. But it is true. I'm not like I am like a believer to some extent in like the Shakespeare, like all's well that ends well. But it's like, it was this horrible, 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 horrible thing that consumed me. And it left me a mess. And then I had my daughter, and it was very confusing because it felt like the top seal of the wound had healed, but all of the mess was still sort of festering beneath it. But I actually think that was like the perfect level of trauma for this book, because I had the objectivity I needed to tell her story, but like the scar tissue and the experience to really poke around and be like, this is what broke you, girl. And I think that that's good. I think it is good to approach, you know, your manuscript with many traumas if you have them, because I think it does give you some perspective.
Over the last couple of years, women's fiction has become my favorite genre to read. I just enjoy, like, I'll be interviewing Catherine Newman next week. I went through a stretch where the first four books that I read last year were the main characters were women going through menopause. I'm like, what happened here? So it gave me a lot of perspective and insight that I was not anticipating. But did you when I picked up your book and was reading through it, it does get spicy, um, to a surprising amount. No complaints. But as you were going into this story and writing it down, did you know that you were writing a romance? Was that the intention? Or were you more so trying to tell this story?
So I knew it was a love story. I did not bind myself to any of the conventions of the romance genre. I just thought that, gosh, and I've told so many people this, like Book Talk and the book community and all of these places are so amazing. And I was not a part of them when I wrote this story. Um, because I was just like, I gotta write my book. And I know that that's like not what everyone would do or say, but I sort of wrote this book in a vacuum. Like I was not extremely online. I was just like trying to raise my kid and then do my other job and then work on this thing. And I never really thought that it would get this far. I was so like, let me just see what the best thing I can do in this first draft is. Let me see what the best thing I can do in this second is. And I was reading a lot of romance at the time, but I was also reading a lot of general fiction, literary fiction. I was reading all sorts of things. I was reading Sally Rooney. I was reading, gosh, what is her name? The literary mystery queen, Tana French. I was reading a lot of Emma Straub. I was reading a lot about women, and then of course I was reading romance as well, kind of going back and forth. And I just wanted to tell a love story because those are my favorite stories. I think that falling in love makes people incredibly vulnerable. I think there's a reason that virtually every song is a love song. I think that it's just incredibly fun to watch. I did not know that I was going to be writing an open door romance. I hadn't really thought about what I wanted or what was right in the intimacy scenes. And then the more I wrote, and I believe in the first draft of the book, they're all closed door. And I sort of assumed it would remain that way. And then a couple of things happened for me, and I felt like I had to get them in the book. And it was like, oh, infertility had kind of destroyed my own sexuality, and like that had been my experience where like I like sex was for making babies, and then I couldn't even do that because I didn't ovulate, so it wasn't for that either. And I was just this like blob, and I felt like so utilitarian, and I felt like such a failure, and I felt like a body in your 30s is a body for bearing children. And as I got to know Nicole and Logan better, and as like these really, the whole book is none of your business. People are like, what did you put in this book? Are there narcotics in this book? Like, why can't I put it down? And I'm like, the whole thing is so absolutely, the only scenes that you should have in that book are the first chapter and then the final podcast chapter. The rest of it is so deeply personal to a woman who is, whose marriage is on fire, who can't get pregnant and is falling in love with someone new. And it really felt like a disservice to take you through the mess that was her life, like on such an intricate line level, and then not show you what it looked like for her to do something with her body besides try and make a baby. It felt really, really important. And it felt really important also because it's a book about falling in love after infidelity, to be like, what does that look like for a woman whose body has let her down and whose like most intimate relationship is now like completely tainted, right? Like, so she's been violated in so many different ways. And like, there are these moments like during their first sex scene where I'm like, oh, like to watch her trust the man again and to watch her body do all of these other completely natural functions that have nothing to do with like making a child in her own image are really like a part of her journey. And I feel like readers deserve that, and I deserve that, and like people who are going through infertility, or also like anyone whose body is just kind of misbehaving a little. Like I think there's a lot to be had in that. And then also like it's fun, you know?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
that's the final thing too. Like there are all of these emotional reasons, but it's also like they have all this tension and like she wants him and he wants her. And like it is fun to be wanted and it is fun to want someone. And it is really fun, like after, you know, hundreds of pages of like tension or whatever, to just like have them get what they want, you know? And I think like I think it's awesome. And I think like writing and this genre and this like era of literature for women, I think is like such a big deal. You know, like when I grew up, the way that even like, you know, my mother's no longer with us, so she can't like get mad when I say this, but like the way my mom talked about women who were sexual is not the way that I talk about women who are sexual with my own daughter. Like there has been like a reclaiming, I think, at least in like some areas um of the world, the internet, whatever, where
Yeah.
like it's okay to want that and like to have a sex drive and like to want to know your body more and to talk about these things and to read about them. And I think especially like not written by men and for men, you know, like in
Mhm.
general, but just being like, oh, like it's fun and we're gonna make it. And then the fact that we get to learn more about our characters and see them really fall apart and get vulnerable with their partners, I think is really special. So it's a privilege to be able to write like open door sex scenes. I really think that yeah, that is my 7 minute TED talk on the importance of smut. So
Yeah. You made a very great case for it.
yes.
The tension that you created in those scenes, I feel like if you didn't have the open doors scenes after that amount of tension, people would be very upset. So
Yes, yeah, yeah. And it's there. It's all there. And I think now it's like I learned so much. This is my debut novel. I learned so much about what I like because I wrote the book for myself. You know, I wrote the book without an agent. I wrote the book sort of knowing that this story or the concept of the story was very special and that if I could pull it off, that I might have a chance. You know, and I'm a professional writer, so I was like assumed I had the chops. I did not. I read a lot of craft books and I did a lot of really hard work to get this into the shape that it is. And then of course I had my agent and my editor and everyone at Avon and HarperCollins who helped me like get it to the next level. But I just now I forgot the question. I don't
that's
know.
okay. I don't know if
But
I have.
yeah,
Well, you're getting into my next question of what
yeah,
was the publishing process like for you?
yeah.
Did you have a completely finished manuscript as you started to pursue agents?
Yeah, I did. So I wrote the whole book. I wrote the first draft over the course of 3 months. After that, I dove into some craft books. If there are any, I'd be happy to send you the links to them. If like there's a lot of writers who are interested, I think they're
Yeah,
fantastic. I will try to list them. On Writing by Stephen King is a classic for a reason. He gives really actionable advice. I was joking about this with my publicist the other day. Like you don't often hear that in line with like a romance author. But really excellent. One is to put your first draft in a drawer for 6 weeks and not go near it to get some perspective. And the second is what I have synthesized as like tell the truth, be brave, where he basically is like, you can write about whatever you want as long as you tell the truth. And I really felt like I tried to bring that to the at least like the infertility storytelling. And then once I knew Nicole, just being like tell the truth all the time. Whenever I wanted to self-edit something out for being like that's too ugly for a love story, I just put it in anyway, you
yeah,
know. And I think that ultimately that's been like one of the reasons why people love or like the book is because it's real. And that was really great. There were a few more. Refuse to Be Done, which is Matt Bell, who's also a lit fic author, creating character arcs. I don't remember the name of the author, but I will send that to you. And then a couple more. Self-editing for fiction writers, which is a fantastic $14 resource with all these different chapters on characterization and dialogue, all sorts of things that I think it was sort of like an MFA in a paperback fantastic resource for editing. And so I used those, and I read a bunch, and I printed out my book, and then I rewrote the whole thing. So the middle of the book is completely different than my first draft. That has not been the case with the manuscripts that I've worked on since then. But I didn't really understand like plot or like character motivation when I wrote my first draft, which was good, because if I did, I would have stopped writing, because I would have been like, this doesn't make sense. But there were things in the book that did not make sense, and I had to kind of reroute them in the middle act to get them to do what I wanted in act 1 and act 3. So I thought that would take 6 weeks. It took 18 months.
Yeah.
And so the book I started in May of 22 or April was ready to query in October of 2023. And I queried a bazillion agents, and I ended up accepting an offer from my agent, Sabrina, at William Morris Endeavor. And she has been fantastic, and really understands my voice and what I'm interested in writing. And was very on board with this whole modern love story thing, which I'm really interested in. And we were able to, I signed with her in January of 24. And then we sold the book. I did a couple of edits for her, and we sold the book in April or May to Avon, which is William Morrow, HarperCollins's romance imprint. So they do Tessa Bailey, they did How to End a Love Story, they did Bridgerton, Julia Whelan's book is with them. Yeah, and it sold to my editor, Shannon, who has just been a fantastic match for me. She reads really broadly. She loves romance, but she's kind of all over the genre. You can't see it here, but I have this 1975 neon sign. And once I saw on Instagram that she posted, and she has the same one. And it's just like really, really magic to find an editor who gets you and wants to make your story better. That's what we all want. And I feel really grateful to have that, you know? And so, yeah, it's been like, and of course, like compressed and all of that are like all the nights that I like couldn't breathe, because it's so stressful. And doing this is so stressful and such a privilege. So I would say that, yeah, it has been like relatively quick for me, but I will also say that I spent almost 2 years writing the book and revising the book. And I think that one of the reasons that I, was able to move through the other systems without that much friction is because of those craft books, and because I think that let me put it this way, the first draft of this book would have been rejected at every point along the way. So yeah, I use those resources, and my husband and my best friend and these beta readers and these people who really, really pushed me, my father-in-law read it, my mother-in-law read it, to create a book that was good enough to bring to querying. And then also luck, I think there's so much luck involved. There's so many fantastic books out there, and it's like, it's a lot of it is like, it's like dating. So there's a lot of fantastic humans out there who need partners, and it's not that easy to find your match, and I found that match with my editor, and that's how books get made.
I recently subscribed to your Substack, like
my Yap.
And was going through. So you've written a second book.
I've written a second book. Yeah.
Working on a third.
Working on my third. Yes.
Your writing process, how has that evolved from working through the first book, all of the edits, that whole process that we just talked about? Now your second and third book, what has changed along the way?
So it's difficult because like writing is never a controlled experiment. It's literally the sloppiest. Every time I start a new manuscript, I feel like I've been partially lobotomized, because I'm not writing the same book. So the process is totally different. For the first, you don't know what you don't know. So there's a lot of comfort in writing the first book, because you can just make it as bad as you want. And you're like, I made this. And it's like, and it's really, really fun, and like things don't make sense, and you just can run on fumes and go anyway. And I think that's really special. And if you're working on your first book, I think you should try not to learn anything right now. I think you should finish the story. And then when you're on your 6-week embargo, that's when you should learn. And then you should go back in control. That's my unsolicited writing advice. The problem is is that now I have novelist brain. And so now I pick up on like plot holes or like plot craters much faster than I did in my first go round. And that can really slow you down. It's not that I always have the intent to like sell or even like send my agent the first draft now, but rather that I'm like, well, okay, so here's an example, like from very early in my third book. A man was brought to dinner by my character's mother, and this surprises the character. And this was like the setup for the book as I'd originally thought I wanted to do it. And I wrote it, and it was funny, and it was clever, and it was vibing, and I was like, this is so good. And then like for a week, I'm like, how would Beth not know that that man wasn't divorced? Like, if the social system in the community is what I think it is, like how could this have been news to her? Because there's like a snarky whatever conversation between her and her daughter, and they like didn't realize this guy wife had left. It's a whole thing. She can't. And so in the past, I would have, like my first book, I would have just written the whole book anyway, because this would not have even occurred to me. Like, oh, what is the social hierarchy in the town that I am writing? Like, how does information move between families? But now I'm writing a book. I'm writing, oh my God, water. Been talking.
Yep.
I'm writing a book about a family. Like I'm really zooming in. I'm writing a love story that is about family dynamics. And I need to know like the family dynamics in the community if she's messing around with her neighbor, like I have to know them. And so I had to go and change the scene. I spent a week thinking about how I could keep the scene because it was cute. And I was like, they got to run into each other at a grocery store. It is what it is. Like if the mom doesn't know, there needs to be a reason. They must have a lower social status, right? Like why is that information being embargoed? This is sort of a pain. Like, yeah. I'm not going to say that like, oh, it's so great. No, it's sort of a pain because like I want to get to the fun part. I want to go. I'm still trying to learn when I need to stop and make a correction and when I should keep going because something can be fixed later. Because it's also difficult now, like my book, where's my book here? Like here's my book. Like this is not made in 2 months. This is made in 2 years. But I've spent so much time with my books at the end of their like production life, yeah. That I see like the trash that I'm producing in a first draft, and there is this desire to go in and make it shiny. But then you might be shining like a piece of garbage that you're not going to use, and that's a really poor use of your time. So in general, let me go back. So I'm trying to figure out when to honor the this doesn't make sense voice versus that you're stalling, like you need production. I'm trying to get to the point where like if it doesn't change the outcome of the next chapter or any chapter after there, I should just make a footnote and keep going at this point. Because more things are going to have to be changed. Like a cousin could be added. Anything could happen to the story. Like she could have whatever, some event that I didn't know about in her 20s that might change the way she behaves. It's still very open and fluid. But what has been interesting is that like I didn't see the end of my first book, The Best Worst Thing, until I was near the end of the first draft. And then I had it. And this is what I wrote about in my Substack yesterday. My second novel, I found it around 50,000 words. And I was able to just kind of like blow through kind of a bullet list of like what I thought was going to happen. And then with this book, I saw it at the end of the first act. And to me, like, I think that is because writing is a skill. And now I've made 2 books. So it's just become easier for me to see the big picture of my story sooner. And then there's this sort of, once I see the big picture, it is difficult for me to continue like writing on fumes without being like tethered to the structure of the story, which is what I was able to do for my entire first draft. So with book 2 at 50,000 words, I outlined or like bullet listed with like dialogue and pictures and all sorts of insane things, the structure at the end of the book and like the usually it's like the opening line and some dialogue and the end line of like the vibes of a scene. This book happened really early. And I needed to because I was making too many mistakes. I was starting to write scenes that didn't make sense. They were just talking for pages and pages. And then they were like in the wrong place, and it was like breaking the book and creating writer's block. So I guess to go back and answer my own question that nobody asked, like, when do I know when I need to like keep pushing or make a change? It's twofold. Does it change the outcome of the next scene or any scene thereafter if I don't fix it, or can a footnote do it? And am I inexplicably not able to write more, which usually means there's a massive problem in the scene you've written or something you've done in the past. And that can be as simple. It often is a plot problem where like maybe your character's like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they announce what they're going to do in order, and those events are actually out of order. That's been a big one for me. And it's like, you better figure out what order you want those events to go in before you spend 9,000 words moving them through these very interchangeable things. Maybe it's like, get a smoothie, go on a run or whatever, and it's out of order. And then you've built this whole kind of useless exploration where maybe you've learned something about your characters, so it's not actually useless, but like, wouldn't you rather get that right the first time? And then the answer is like, maybe if you're ready, like writing is a guess, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really, but this is fun. Like, and I think like that's something that I'm trying to remember is like, what a privilege it is to make stuff up. And also to be like challenged by my job in this creative way. I feel really, really lucky to do that.
So it seems like you've gone from a straight pantser with your writing to getting some more planning in. How has it does it affect? And you kind of touched on it, but specifically, how does it affect your creative process when you figure out the ending? I
Yeah.
try to write, and I feel like whenever I have figured out the ending, I like want to rush to get there. What has your experience been like with figuring it out towards the end to figuring it out more in the middle?
So I think one is that like I'm a big believer in like robust scene building. So whether you know the ending or not, like the end of every scene should be exciting. And so I think my like only rule as an author is like no boring scenes. I won't write them. I refuse to be bored when I'm
Mm-hmm.
writing. So I'm like, if the scene with her mom is boring, then it's not allowed to be in the book. Like those are the rules. It must, you know, there has to be another way to get this information in. Slash, you probably don't need this information at all if it's boring. Like why? I think I'm the most interesting person in the world. That is whatever. That is what it is to be a novelist, right? I have to assume that my readers find me infinitely less interesting. So if I'm bored with my own voice, then like I
Mm-hmm.
can only imagine what someone else will feel. So I think part of it for that is like I'm always trying to have a good time. Even when a scene is miserable, I'm always trying to have a good time. And I think there's like a lot of that's why romance is the best. Like that's my
Mm-hmm.
opinion is like, oh, like there's just this constantly climbing tension that's like so delicious that you can play with that is like both inextricably tied and unrelated to the ending because everyone knows how a love story is going to end, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think in romance there is actually so much pleasure in the journey. So part of it is like, oh, write a love story because everyone knows, and yet we read them, right? And then I think like the second is just being like, oh, like more like
Mm-hmm.
more crazy stuff, more scenes that are fabulous to write, like as many arguments as you can possibly shove into a book, you should do that. So like more conflict, more resistance. The Matt Bell craft book, Refused to Be Done, is such a, I use that mostly for my third draft, but his first draft stuff is so interesting. And he talks about, he's like, you don't want a rock in a hard place in your book. You want many rocks and many hard places. So, like, I think in a really compelling story, like the protagonist should constantly be challenged and they should constantly be under pressure, and then they should and you should be constantly excavating. And I think all of that. And then also it's just hard. Like it's a marathon, it's being patient. It's like, you know, to go back to like the open door stuff, like the whole book is foreplay, the whole book, right? And then like the last 20 pages are your ending. So I think part of it too is like, get good at being patient, because this whole process, like as a business and as a creator, it's just slow, you know, like the whole thing is just slow. And it'll be worth it. Like that's like sort of my answer, is just like, you know, like one scene at a time, one chapter at a time, like try to focus on like the bricks or like the foundation of the story. And then when you zoom out, like there'll be something beautiful at the end. But I think like you can't, if you approach your story like a reader, or like you think about your reader, like the Stephen King says he always writes for his wife. And then I'll add on like a tip for that. If you're writing, if you have like a voracious reader friend who's down to help you, like sending them a chapter when you're done with a chapter can also be really fun, because so much of writing is like, oh, it's so long and it's so lonely. And if you can have somebody be like, yes, more, or whatever, chapter by chapter, that can help you focus on making every little block like as fun and tense as possible while you're building your giant Lego castle that is a novel. So, no.
I like that advice.
Yes.
For I think your most recent yap on your Substack, you talk about your favorite part of storytelling, which I didn't write down because I was just going to pose it as a question, and now I'm wishing I remembered it was character development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that your favorite part of storytelling?
So I have a few different answers. One is that like I think that most stories are derivative. So I can't tell you how many times I've been like on Publishers Marketplace or Instagram or something and then not been able to breathe because somebody announces a book that's similar to mine. So I mean, if I wouldn't have been able to breathe if I had seen the announcement for The Wedding People, which is like a comp for my book, I guess, like on the more contemporary fiction. I like kind of comp my book as like The Wedding People meets Nobody Wants This, the Adam Brody show. But still, I'd be like, oh no, another like more infertility, more infidelity. Like there's no space for my book. But you know, stories are stories. Most stories have been told. So I think like the chief antidote to feeling like you've created something that's just like everything else is the humans in your story and the way they grade against each other. It's also like I said, the best way to fill space between plot, because you know at the end of the day it's your reader and 400 or 300 400 pages of whoever these people are. One of my like least favorite things I've ever heard when someone was talking about like romance novels to me is that like they're not important literature because they don't change you. And I was like, well, first of all, gross, but second of all, like, are you sure? Because they're books about people and like you don't know what kind of arc will change somebody's life. I do feel like I'm the creating character arcs book that I was discussing before does such a good job at this. I'm not interested in reading about perfect people. And I'm really interested in getting to know people in a way that I think can only be done in a book. We don't get like internal character development as much in movies and shows. It's like a really, really special and intimate way to get to know somebody. And at the end of the day, like if I'm going to spend 1 to 2 years cutting people open, like I want to find weird stuff. I also think like in a love story, and it's like how many romance novels are published in a year? Like, I mean, traditionally probably a few thousand, and then when you take into account all of the indie novels, I mean, it's unlimited. There are unlimited amounts of romance novels that you can go and pick and read. And it's like, why would you read mine? What can I give you? And I'm like, well, I can show you the way I see people and the way I see the world. And I think that that's something that I had this wonder if she's still alive. I should send her a copy of my book. I had this journalism teacher in ninth grade, and she's probably like, I'm 60. Of course I'm alive, you brat. Um, I was like 14 when I met her, but she used to say, like, it was our journalism thing, day one. She's like, you bring to the table who you are. So I'm building people who aren't real. They are an amalgamation of everyone I've ever met and read about, and all the songs and movies and books that I've consumed. Plus, I'm the narrator. Like, I'm the voice.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like such a special recipe for me to create a human. And I think at the end of the day, like, stories don't stick with us as much as like people do. And it's such a privilege to get to create people who are broken and worthy of redemption, and to just kind of watch them make a mess together and then try to clean it up. And I think it's like I said, because this is a marathon, like, that's just mystery that keeps me engaged, right? Is like peeling back a little bit of them chapter by chapter is just something that I love to do, and I think it makes the stories better.
What are some authors that influence you, and find did you struggle at all finding your voice as an author with having different writers that you have read over time?
So this is funny. I did something very naughty, and I wrote a romance in third person, which is like not the classic contemporary
Mm-hmm.
take on storytelling now. I was really, really influenced when I read this book I read two books over the course of 12 hours when I had the flu, when I was writing the first draft of The Best Worst Thing. And they were Katie Coutinho's Birds of California, which is a third person romance. It's essentially kind of like, she's like a washed up child star, and she's reunited with her old co-star to do like a money grab, like 10-year reunion for their sort of Hannah Montana show. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic book. And it's written in third person. And it's very like LA drenched and voicey. And they're both such messes, the characters. And I also read Normal People, and Sally Rooney, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I read them at the same time. And I was like, F it, I'm bringing that. Those are the vibes I'm bringing to this book. Just like kind of like incisive and clever, and obviously like Rooney writes lit fic, and I am not her, but just the way that she like slowed down and watched people was of a lot of interest to me. And so those two voice books were huge. And then I also had just read People We Meet on Vacation, Emily Henry's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked like the slow burn dual timeline of that. And so those books were huge. And I'm also like really influenced by music. And so like I can't talk about comps for books and not talk about music, because I bleed songs dry. So pretty much for every chapter in this book, I listen to like one song on repeat and kind of just like wring out the music or the tension or like the beat of something. And so huge. I mean, it's obviously Taylor Swift, but some smaller artists too, Rosie Darling and Emily James, who are both like LA girls who are like recording in their dorm rooms, who make this kind of like singer-songwriter music that's so beautiful, and you can kind of write to, like, it's not distracting. Wild Rivers is a folksy duet band. And so these music and these songs just become the soundtrack. And then like voice, funny, I wrote about voice yesterday in my Substack. I write them like in a blackout on my lunch break, and I don't know who reads them because my mom is no longer with us. So I'm like, I don't know. But
It's me now.
you read them. So Bob reads them.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, voice is just like what comes out when you get every word to do exactly what you want it to. That's just voice, and I think it's like, I suppose as an exercise, I could like try to write a chapter and sound like Kennedy Ryan, or like, or I suppose I could do that like for fun. But to me, like, voice is like an equation, and it's the story that needs to be told, the character, like whose POV has the story, and then, me bringing to the table like who I am, and that's voice. And it's also, this is what I talked about yesterday, it's like movable. So like my voice in book 2 and then in book 3, it's still me, but like it is shaped and sculpted by the work I have to do. So you
Mhm.
can't completely get your voice back. Like it sort of belongs to the novel. And so yeah, I'm sure you could tell that all the other books were me because I still do. I have the same tricks and whatever, but story changes, voice changes. So my big advice about voice is like, don't worry about it. Just do your best. Like the story will leave your hands. So long as you're like well read, I think
Mhm.
the story will leave your hands or your mouth or however you're going to produce this thing pretty close to what it needs to be. And then there are tons of things that you can do to polish on a line level, tons of resources for that. So, yeah.
I you skipped ahead to one of my last questions because huge music fan. It influences the way I just kind of walk through life. So that's always a question of what music and do you have a playlist? Clearly, you do. For the book, I just wanted to share a writing horror story of a story that I had been working on for a long time, and your the publishers weekly of the or the publishers marketplace of seeing stories that were along the same lines. Quality Land, which is written by a German author, had so many of the same story elements to a story that I had been working on. And then Talking Heads Road to Nowhere was just like on repeat as I was like developing this story, and is a huge part of the book that this German author wrote. And I'm like, seriously? Even the song that I had in my mind is the song that you reference in your book a number of times. So that was just that book is has been left unfinished after that. After reading the book, that I'm like, oh, he already wrote the book that I wanted to write and use the same song, so we're gonna scratch that one off the list.
Oh my gosh. I haven't had that happen yet,
Yeah.
but I definitely sent like emails to my agent at 4 in the morning being like, have you seen this? What are we going to do? And then she's just
Mm,
like, just keep going.
yeah.
Just keep going. She's like, you were so weird. Like everything's gonna turn out okay. There's like zero chance that your story's not gonna get weird, you know. But I think, yeah, it's also, you know, there's a Big Magic. Have you read that?
I have it on my desk. I have not read it yet.
You know, and it's like, well, I've read like a quarter of it, so we can just all be honest here. But
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
had a big conversation with my brother-in-law about it, who's read all of it, we assume. And it, but just that idea at the very beginning where she's like, oh, stories arrive intact, which is like a lot of people believe that, and you know, they can be shared between people. And I think I don't know like where I fall on that. Maybe I should read the whole book and get back to you.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think that it's a combination of things, you know, and I think like we're all living in this sort of like cultural rant where like it's
Yeah.
not that unusual that someone else would put 2 and 2 and 6 and 9 together.
Yeah.
Because you know there's unlimited stories to tell and then there's also like 6 stories to tell.
Yeah.
You know, and we're all kind of raised around like the same references and stuff. And yeah, I bet your book would be different. I bet it would. But sometimes it can be really
Mhm.
scary to keep going if it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's already here in my hands. So, yeah.
Um, there was another example of this with an author that I interviewed, Devin Murphy, who wrote The Boat Runner, and very World War II based, similar plot points to All the Light We Cannot See, which came out like weeks before his book. And
Mm-hmm.
his agent was like, "Hey, have you read All the Light We Cannot See?" He's like, "No, I haven't yet." He's like, "You should probably pick it up." So he went to a bookstore, grabbed a copy, like read it in a day. He's like, "Oh, I'm so screwed." His book
It
became a national bestseller, so it did well in its own right. But
it's really scary. I mean, we
yeah,
all remember, I think, didn't like, wasn't there an Ashton Kutcher movie situation? And then the same movie came out with Justin Timberlake like a
yep,
week
like the
later.
same
They were both
summer.
like the Friends with Benefits films where it's
Yes,
like, yeah, I mean,
no strings attached. Yeah,
there are like holes in the market and more than one person might realize how to fill it pretty much at the same time.
yeah,
And it's really scary. Like I've had friends who've been on like who've like they wrote a book and then like a movie comes out and it's the same. It's
yeah.
the same. Um,
Well, there's so many trends in publishing, from the stories that publishers are looking to buy to the covers that are designed. Like there was a stretch where a few years ago where it was like just almost like a splotchy color scheme was like the thing that publishers just kept putting out. And I'm like, I had 5 books on our new release table. I'm like, these are indistinguishable. What did you guys do to me?
Oh yes, like the very contemporary fiction. There was a phase where everything was very bright and
Yeah.
blurry. Yes, I remember
Yeah.
that. The
Yeah.
blob. Yes, they all
Yes.
look like. Yeah, it's trends are really interesting. And I don't know how much time we have because I turned off all my other screens. Oh,
That's a
no
good.
time. But one of the things that I was and I've been really blessed, like with the team at Avon, that's been very, very all in on this story, and they were really game to not do a cartoon cover for this book. And I don't think that would have been the case at every publisher because that's how romance novels look.
Yeah.
So that's the consumer expectation, and that's how they look on Book Talk, and like that's the way that it has to be. And I think that that's all fine, and I love those covers. I think that they're adorable, but I also wanted to like this book to me really asks the reader to like do some hard things and talk about some hard subjects in a way that are like graphic. And
Yeah.
I just wanted the cover to warn you that things are going to get real, and also that you're safe here because look, they're in love, you know. And I think that the cover does that, and I was really, really thrilled that they were game to create a cover that kind of did some heavy lifting to explain what you're going to get in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I appreciate chatting with you. The book, The Best Worst Thing, comes out October 14th.
Yeah, have it.
This is the first time that I have done an interview and I haven't held the book to
Oh,
hold
let's
up.
get you a book.
I
wish I
downloaded
had.
a digital copy of it off of Edelweiss.
Okay, yeah.
So if you have an extra copy,
Yes, I will ask.
I'll take an extra copy.
Yes. I'll have them mail you one. Yeah, thank you. So, thank you so much.
Yeah. And this is the pre-order podcast. So in order to push pre-orders on our website, it's 20% off up until the book comes out.